Hello, everybody. Again, this podcast is still yet to be named. And this week, I've got some really brilliant guests with me. I've got David, a staple of the podcast right now, tech company CEO and passionate about AI. I have Peter Nixie, full stack dev and AI implementation consultant. Glenn, focusing on how we use AI in healthcare. We have Adrien, an entrepreneur, a non-tech technophile, Matthew, proudly failed entrepreneur and recovery consultant, and myself, founder of Wombat and unashamed vibe coder. So luckily, that is the theme today. We're going to be talking a little bit about vibe coding, and this means different things to different people. So I'm just going to open up to the group. What is vibe coding to you?
So I'll just jump right in. It's one of those terms that's managed to go from nothing to meme to a term with its own Wikipedia page, including a controversy section in less than a month. Parthy threw the term out there, and as someone who really can code, he was introducing a term that is also about the way that normal people, both normal developers and real normal people, are using AI to build software in ways that are amazing and enabling people to build things that are really cool and useful to them and potentially businesses. But yeah, there's big question marks about precisely what it means, perhaps what downsides there might be. And I'm sure we can have a pretty good discussion about all of those. But maybe one big question for me is whether really vibe coding is the same for someone like me I can code, but I'm not a software engineer. I'm not a full-time developer. I can build really cool things that are incredibly useful and exciting to me in Cursor. But is vibe coding really the same for me as it is for someone like Kapathy or some of the other people on this call? And that's a big question for me.
Yeah, I'll take it and step in and continue on from that. So I think the vibe coding thing was made possible by a release that Cursor did in agentic YOLO mode, which is called in basically the 23rd of December. And that for me was a big change. I'd been using Cursor for 6 months previously to that. And it was a good autocomplete and the best autocomplete out there for code. But this agentic mechanic was all of a sudden something different. It was basically, I gave it a really high level instruction and it just went off and began to do things all by itself. Create problems, see the problems, fix the problems, try again. And things just began to happen and began to get made. It was a very different experience. So I definitely believe vibe coding is a great term for it in terms of it does need to be named this because it's very different from anything that's gone before. I think Matthew's points are also very relevant, though, in that how much skill do you need to use it to make something useful at the moment versus can anyone who has no knowledge of coding just pick it up and do stuff with it? And I think ultimately that is the direction of travel and where it will end up, but it's definitely not there now.
This second tweet after Andre Karpathy, who, if people don't know him, was one of the co-founders, but he was like definitely senior leadership and like up there and head of AI at Tesla and just all around extremely interesting and smart guy. He said he views it as a slider. At one end of the slider is coding how we did it 3 years ago, and the other end of the slider is vibe, like full-on vibe coding. And somewhere, and you're going to push that slider to somewhere that suits you. And at the very far end of that slider, there is, I just want a new image editing app, build it. That's extreme vibe coding. And then at the other end, there's extreme micromanagement and oversight. One of the things that's true about coding today is interesting is that it is agentic and it is also multi-agentic, but we are the second agent in it right now. There is one agent that is running Cursor and is writing code and is doing the function calling. And there is a second oversight agent, which is us telling it what to do. And so for now, I think that vibe coding needs you to oversee it to some degree. But I think later this year, we're going to see that second agent switch out for AI too.
And I was just thinking, I really like the idea of the slider because it gives you that visual of, so myself as a non-technical technophile who is now finding ways of building things in a very small capacity compared to many of the others on the call. So I think Andrei Karpathy often has referred to it as doing weekend projects and others like that. I'm definitely at that end. And one thing that I'd probably add on to that end of the slider is it's not just about giving the instruction, it's then the vibe of then being able to go with whatever the output is after that and being able to tailor the output in a way that maps back onto what you imagined the thing would be.
Yeah, I'd also say on top of that is that some of the quality of UX and UI that you get out of it when you're just giving it instruction is way better than I would have been able to do myself. And not only, so there's certain elements of it that are just super high quality. And I don't need to have a designer design something before I say to my tool, as the best UI designer or the best UX designer in the world, go and create me the best interface for uploading a file, an amazing waiting screen. And it will do it way better than I could have done without that kind of guidance. So I think there are certain aspects where it's just more powerful than what a normal developer knows because it knows front end, back end, and design.
Yeah, I can talk to that as a product designer or ex-product designer. I used to just push pixels around for trying to get everything pixel perfect. And now whenever I'm in a company where they're like, oh, it needs to be pixel perfect, or we need to do another round of screens, I cringe a little bit because I'm like, gosh, you really don't, you're wasting time nowadays in doing that. I understand having a plan and making the architecture and how you want it to flow, but being to the degree of pixel perfect that was demanded of you 5-6 years ago is so unnecessary nowadays. Like, yeah, anyone can whip up screens. In my personal case with Wombat, it's just myself and my co-founder who's a back-end developer. He hates front end. Last week, I showed him how to use Cursor to do front end, and it was just like a skill unlock. He was like, oh, I can do this now.
So I've always had this suspicion, I wouldn't even say it was a suspicion, but an observation that a lot of slowness in the software dev cycle comes by virtue of there being people in the process who don't have continuous output during the process. So the obvious examples that are product managers and design. And because dev is in principle a bottleneck, or at least the limiting factor on things, what happens is that if you have other people on the project who aren't then quickly taken off the project when the bits they need to do end, they just continue doing other bits. And you get this bloat of stuff going on. And I think it's super interesting now if we get this, when we get these tools that produce these things so quickly. To your point, Lizzie, it's really interesting that you said that pixel perfect is a waste of time. I think pixel perfect was a thing just because people were hired to do that. And then you're like, it might as well be pixel perfect. And nobody internalized how big the cost of that was, because it wasn't just the cost of the design time. It was then the cost of the iterations of the devs, because it wasn't pixel perfect when it went through to dev. And now if you just build it and you're like, I'd just rather ship another feature than hang around.
Yeah, I think on that pixel perfect thing, you couldn't trust the UI developer before to actually do a really consistently good design, to be honest. So the days where you needed a designer to actually look over it to make it look good, I think there was a place for that actually, because I've seen really great designs, the UI developer get their hands on it, and then it ends up being like terrible, basically. I've seen that so many times. Now actually with one more prompt, you can just say to it, if it is terrible the first time, you can actually just say to it, I'll tidy that up, make it look a little nicer. And you know what? In fact, go one step further, just say this needs to be the most beautiful product you've ever built in your entire life. You say that to the AI and you come out with some amazing results. It's fantastic.
And also just very quick to that point, Adrien, I know you were wanting to get in, but the reality is for 98% of design, you just do the Tailwind version and it's better than 98% of everything else out there on the internet. It's like 98% of all the best design is just Tailwinds now. You're not going to get better than that unless you've got somebody really exceptional. You're going to have a really good reason for saying, it's like going and saying, I want a custom car built. Who's going to say that?
Just thinking it's Pareto principle building on top of that. It's just going, okay, this will get me most of the way there. That is the vibe. Or if it doesn't, I'll have another go at it. And yeah, I really like that kind of thinking around moving away from the pixel perfect to something that does a really great job.
Yeah, I was going to step in and take a little step back from where the pixel perfect thing came from. It's an interesting comment because it also goes back to what vibe coding is about. So it goes, I think Adrien is reinforcing the idea of the slider is a good thing. And I'll take a step back and put it in bigger strategic technology innovation context and look at the innovator's dilemma. So one of the key things that the work that Clay Christensen did at Harvard and immortalized in his book, The Innovator's Dilemma, is the fact that successive waves of technology come along that are not as good as the previous generation at the specific task that everyone assumes that they're going to do. And I see this, once you understand that framework, it begins to become quite apparent that a lot of the noises and comments that are coming out about vibe coding at the moment. So when the personal computer came out versus the mainframe, a lot of people like the IBMers of the world were like, this is nowhere near a computer. I laugh at even calling that thing a computer because it's nowhere near as powerful as this massive mainframe I have that's running a whole bank systems or whatever it might be. And it was really underpowered in many ways versus for what the traditional job of the computer was. But in reality, what the personal computer did was give the ability for individual users to not have to use the mainframe, but just use a computer in their own house with initially a TV screen and a keyboard attached to a pretty ugly bit of plastic box. And that then let them do stuff in a very personal way. Initially started off as low-cost jobs, but then went up higher. And Clay Christensen's work does that across multiple industries. He's showing how that worked in the steel industry, he's showing how that worked 100 years ago in the crane and digger industry and things like that. So it was really quite interesting how these new waves of technology come along and they all have the same sort of characteristics. The new wave is not as good as generally the category it's trying to go up against, but it's a lot cheaper and it opens it up to a lot more people. And I think that's what we're seeing now with vibe coding. It's going to open up software development to a lot more people. And that's the idea. I might not need to have any software experience before. I just know that I wanted a tool to do a job. Vibe coding is actually more analogous to Excel. So I think Excel, everyone thinks of it as a spreadsheet, but in reality, it's a platform that people build business tools on top of. I think vibe coding is going to begin to compete with Excel for those sort of things. It's going to let people build those little apps that they needed for their business and that they would never have justified before if they have to hire developers for it. But now they don't, then they're going to probably build them. I think we're going to see a lot of software that looks like that. Not necessarily an app that needs to be pixel perfect, that because I want to sell it to millions of people, and therefore it needs to be brilliant to sell to millions of people. It's generally not going to need to do that, although I agree with Pete that it's going to, with Tailwind and modern tools, it's going to nearly do that anyway. It's going to be pretty damn good.
So I totally agree with that. And I keep thinking about analogies to the web when it came out. I think there's so many interesting crossover learnings from there. And one of the things that struck me as you were saying that, Glenn, is that if you think about HTML and how it compared to things like Microsoft Word format or desktop publishing, it was obviously like this brutalist, minimalist, like substandard version of it that you couldn't do any of those things with. And yet today, everything that we do is now written essentially in HTML. And one of the things, I was talking about this last week, but I think there's a really interesting mapping is if you think about HTML, so it was like simple, minimalist, anybody could produce it, but it really took off with platforms like MySpace and Facebook and eBay, where they did the majority of it for you. And they constrained it sufficiently around the things that you wanted, such that you could express yourself and do the stuff you wanted, and the platform lifted you up. And I think that we are in this interim stage at the moment. I think that we're in an interim stage where we're all like building on the raw web and raw HTML, But I think that application development is going to explode when somebody builds the Facebook of application development in the way that Facebook became the platform for web publishing.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things to say to that. Firstly, I'm not sure if I like that future too much, because from the simple point where I don't know if it's the same or not, but I don't know what style of music you listen to, but you look at the kind of music that came out like in the 60s and the 70s, absolutely awesome. And then what they did was they released YouTube and everyone said, oh, this is going to be brilliant. It's going to be amazing. The person in his bedroom can make amazing music from the back of it. And literally, it's meant that we have now got like an infinite amount of dross and crap in the world. And I'm just a bit worried that this is now going to happen where every single app you go to, no matter how well designed it is, you're not going to be able to tell if it's got someone with any brains behind it. You're not going to be able to tell anything. And there's no bar for you to actually, you don't have to go out and raise money to convince other people this is a good idea. I'm not saying that was a good thing, because I think, releasing it and letting everyone do stuff is fantastic. But it's just, the world is going to be just full of nonsense apps, isn't it, quite soon?
I saw a comment on TikTok literally today with somebody going, look, there's not been any good music released since the 70s and 80s. And somebody else's comment was like, there's not been any good music released since I was 16. The music when I was 16 is the best music there's ever been.
And when the internet was young, there was this period where it looked like everybody would be able to run their own email server. Everybody would run their own DNS, that it would be radically disaggregated. And that turned out to be incredibly difficult, partly because security turned out to be an issue, but also because it was actually very difficult to build and run that software for anybody other than people who are really willing to put quite a lot of effort in. I think the thing that's slightly different now is that over the last 20 years, there's a huge amount of infrastructure been built in terms of APIs, into very well run, very robust services that, combined with something like these tools and vibe coding, open up the possibility for individuals to build exactly what they need. I think we've talked on this in the past about all the tools for speaking to your computer now, the super whispers and the like, and they're fantastic. But we're at the point where you really can build those things for yourself and keep them completely private and something that you own. So to some extent, it's less a case of not trusting the apps that you go and try and consume, because the ones you do try and consume will probably end up still being quite good. There will still be a team behind them, even if individual members of those teams are building code with AI and YOLOing their way through feature builds. At the same time, you'll be able to build stuff for yourself. Just back to what we were talking about earlier, building your weekend stuff. I build tools for my wife. She's a journalist, and it's very useful for her to have private transcription, because some people don't want their interviews transcribed with cloud services, and I can do that. And it's very straightforward. Or I have a podcast that I enjoy with a bunch of other people and friends, so I can transcribe all the episodes with Whisper and build a search engine for them. And it's just fun. It's just a tool for them and me. It's not something I'm ever going to make money from. But the exciting aspect of this for me is maybe we can make that vision of the personalized individual internet real with these tools. And people will be able to get back some degree of control of their data, because they won't have to rely on Google and Apple for everything anymore.
Yeah, no, I was just looping a few of those things together, from Glenn's kind of mainframe to personal computer, and Pete's Microsoft to web publishing. And then what you were saying there, Matthew, it feels like it's a creativity unlock, acknowledging the dross that might come along with it. And for me, as the non-techie guy, this is maybe where, in terms of vibe coding, where I come up against difficulties, and where I think we're at an interim stage. So I go, hey, this is great. I want to do this. And I go along and I start building stuff out. And because I don't have these solid software engineering principles, suddenly there's like a bunch of errors and things don't work and they break at certain points, and I go, I don't really know how to fix this. And Andrei Karpathy might say, oh, just like vibe code your way through it, just chuck it into something else. However, I don't necessarily have the frameworks to work with those errors. And what's really interesting to me is that I do foresee, and I think others on this chat do agree, is that we will get to a point where the bug fixing and all those bits start getting ironed out. And then you truly go from the mainframe to the personal computer in every house. You give everyone the ability to, publish their own web pages in Facebook style. And you do get everyone making their own music apps, whatever they need in an individual capacity. And what's really interesting is the amount of creativity that then unlocks will potentially then result in that significant shift where suddenly does software engineering become the mainframe of our age, and what is the next thing? What is that PC of our age? I know there's software engineers on here, and I'd be really interested to get the view on what you think that is.
I think we are all running away from AI catching us, basically. And I think it's caught like low-level software developers, like it's done that already. I can see that. I am now speaking to low-level software developers when I speak to Cursor or whatever tool you're using. There are many tools on the market, but I can see it catching me quite quickly. There is nothing than what I know that cannot be automated. The thing that I would say is maybe context. It doesn't know the context of everything that I know, because I remember something from 6 weeks ago that was important at that time, and somehow my brain figures out that that's important right now when I'm looking at it. But that's just a matter of time before it catches me there. When I'm building software, I've got a task list, I've got how the architecture works. There's nothing in that can't be replicated. Like, I'm in that circle. I think the way this is going ends up being quite scary, really, because I think the software engineering industry is an example of where everything is going. Like your vibe coding, right? That's because they built it for software engineers, because it was built by software engineers. So they thought we know what to do this, but it's going to attack every single sector of every single market. There's going to be vibe everything. There's going to be vibe marketing, vibe, this isn't like a thing just for software engineering. So I think that's where, this is going to the end of normal roles as we see them, basically.
Name of the podcast, The Everything Vibe.
Everything vibe.
No, everything vibe is much more positive. Don't make it dark, Lizzie. Come on.
So a big criticism that I personally get, and also I did have a conversation with a friend of mine this week about this, is he essentially said, look, no, vibe coding is not going anywhere. It's going to be thrown away because you can't use any of this in production. People are going to just go back to the way that coding was and whatever. And for me, it's very difficult to process in my brain like the product development timeline as it was, where it's like, okay, I've got an idea, I'm going to pass that on to some designers, we're going to use to test that, then we're going to build that, and then we hope to God and we pray that what we built actually is product market fit, and then we go back to the beginning and do it all again. That process costs so much in time and in money to do it properly for something that might not end up working. So for me, like, where vibe coding fits in is just, okay, we need to find a space where we can dynamically start throwing things at the wall, whether it's good, whether it's bad. We just have to work out a margin of acceptable error and try and push something through to product market fit as fast as possible. And then if you get it, then build it properly.
It's in production with me at the moment.
What's the other thing you're doing just at the moment, Glenn?
Oh, my whole field apps and the operational tools.
I know that, but what was on your to-do list today?
I thought, well, my to-do list is, I think that was my fault, actually. I'm not sure I can blame the vibe for that.
Just on the whole speed of software development, though, it could be that all the vibe coding that's being done now is just creating an absolute mess for the industry, and then there's going to be decades of us sorting it out. But I think what's actually true is that, look, you get a product out there, you get some sales in. We all know the most important thing to any business is growth, is revenue. So you get that in. I don't think you have to worry, because in 6 months' time, the tools will be so good, they'll be able to look at your entire code base and just sort them out anyway. So I don't know why everyone's getting their knickers in a twist about this, to be honest, because the rate of speed has improved, that everything is improving. It will be fixable in 6 months' time by an agent that will just go through it all and sort it out. That's where it's going. So.
Yeah, that's my take. I want to share a couple of conversations we've had over the last 2 days, actually. A friend of mine who's an ex-senior IBM guy, he's a senior IBM guy now, but we were at uni together. He hasn't coded in quite a while, but all of a sudden he's back using these tools and coding again. We were having a conversation on Saturday. He was actually feel quite alive again. And that was quite an interesting use of terms. And I go, you know what? That's exactly how I feel as well. I feel alive again. So it goes back to Adrien's point on creativity. So I think there's a lot of focus. I think David's in the weeds in terms of building a lot of stuff for clients and other tools that need to be done at production scale quantity. I'm in this startup space where I'm able to be building things quickly and iterating towards product market fit. I think that's really powerful. So to go back to your points around that, Lizzie, finding product market fit quickly and smaller iteration cycles is super, super important and easier to do. So if I look back over my career, some of the best applications we've done is when we've really known the use case very well and been able to do the coding and development as well. That's produced products that have bypassed the design, the engineering, and certainly in enterprise, some of the business analyst functions, and just gone straight to delivering an end product that's fit for purpose, that because we're the users of that as well, and then because we can iterate on it, those elements, we end up building really good product. And I've done that in 2 or 3 different use cases. We're competing against major internal 50-person development teams, but those products went on to become the award-winning product in that sector because of our ability to see an issue, sort it out ourselves without having to communicate it excessively through this product requirement documentation and stuff like that, and just get on and do it, and then iterate quickly and then use it. And it goes back, I think it goes back to one of the things that Adrien said earlier on as well. People are coming up with the idea for a feature, they're seeing it created, and they realize, oh, I didn't actually say that. What I actually meant was this. And then they refine it quickly. So I think showing someone what it is you're going to get with that really quickly really helps in the software development process. We know that's how Agile is meant to work. It's the trouble that Agile is now split into 2-week sprints that maybe fit into a 6-week or 8-week epic. Whereas in reality, with vibe coding, we're getting there in days. Is going to make better software happen, not in terms of better quality code. Everyone talks about better software being better quality code, but we will get better software because the features will be better and they'll work in the way that the end users need and want, and we'll be able to iterate ourselves to that very quickly.
Yeah, so is vibe coding the thing that was missing and required to make Agile actually real?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm convinced that's the way to do.
The other thing is that I think Agile is wolf in sheep's clothing. Agile was a way of software engineers taking control of the situation. It was dressed up as a way of getting things out quickly. But really what it was a very cleverly designed set of rules that meant the software engineers could do exactly what they wanted to do, and nobody could fault them for it, because they're like, you get this many points, and if we don't get stuff done, then it goes through to next week. I think Agile was dressed up as speed, and the reality was it was just the protection layer for software developers to be able to push back.
The other people who have manifestos are revolutionaries.
I think there's actually something that people know who work in software, and you'll know it from the companies you've worked at before, is that there are some certain people who love to deliver product to customers, who like to ship, right? There's always those people. And those are the ones that answer Slack channels. They're the ones that, like, when there's a meeting request, they'll pipe up, and they just love to ship. They love it to be. But there's a whole industry of software engineers that don't like to ship. They hate to put anything out there. They hate to have any bugs that come in on it. They hate to actually have real world problems. And there was a place for them to hide then. And there's not a place for them to hide anymore. In that way, I absolutely love it. And the other thing I'd say about delivery of software is that it's a fallacy to think one person plus one person is the same to manage one single person. It's a load of BS, right? you're multiplying the miscommunication, you're multiplying all of the errors by involving someone else. So now what I do with my guys internally is I say, and there are women as well, say my guys and girls. That's actually, I can't really say that either. I'm getting it all wrong. But having said that, now what I do with them is I say, look, you're a front-end developer, but you're going to do the back end as well. And if you need back end, what you're going to do is you're going to ask advice from a senior back end engineer when you need to do the back end. And what that's done now is giving complete ownership to one person for one whole entire feature. Maybe I'll give them an entire customer and say, you're dealing with everything from that customer. So you get to know that customer really damn well. And then there's no miscommunication. And you know what? With that technique, it's worked so well. With one of our problem customers at the start of January, I had this whole thing where it was like, we're leaving you, you're a terrible company. I had a call this morning, one single engineer doing everything. He's probably done, in the last 3 months, he's probably done like a year's worth of work. That's what it feels like. And that exact same customer said, I absolutely love your business. I love what you're doing for us. It's an amazing turnaround. And that I can see directly from someone who's taking more ownership because of doing vibe coding on certain bits they don't really understand. And it's worked out really well in that way.
And cool. I was just riffing off that. I was having this thought about how we were talking about shipping products, like delivering, pushing something that is made out. One of the bits that I find really useful with vibe coding is actually the process of getting feedback back, as in thinking about, okay, so how, as a non-technical person, do I document this? What is the correct architecture? What components should I be using? And being able to engage with AI coding tools that are, for me, it's set up as like you are an expert coach who is walking me through all of these principles that I just let me know when there's anything that I'm potentially doing wrong. Like that kind of feedback is also, I find, super useful. So for me, that's also part of vibe coding. It's not just the output, the product at the end of it. It is also the process and getting that upskilling aspect. For me, that's also part of vibe coding.
Yeah, I think that's part is, sorry, Pete, in terms of product, we talk about product skills, a couple of things coming through there. That idea that they're, even to write a PRD, you need to understand everything that needs to be done up front. Well, we try to do that in an agile way and then go back and say, we're not going to get it right exactly, but it's going to be our best guess. Even that process is now being compressed into like, let's just build it. I need a button that does this. Oh, okay. And I'm on the call to people earlier on today, and I said, okay, I need a filter on my dashboard that does this. And I quickly typed that in and continued the conversation with the guy I was with, sharing my screen with, and it just made it at the time. I went, okay, now we've got this feature, we've got the ability to filter this list like this, and now we can extract these email addresses that we needed for a certain purpose. Wow, that was cool. And I didn't even break sentence in terms of the conversation we were having on the video call. The machine just went away and took care of it, and it did a really good job. And and that sort of stuff is really cool that it can do those sort of things. But to go back to that sort of concept of the teams and back end and front end, I've been a very big believer in hiring high quality full stack engineers for quite a while, and I tried to refine that even more by hiring full stack engineers that had a feel for design as well, so they knew what good looked like. All my interviews over the last 10 years have said, tell me about a product you like, right? And you can't say the iPhone, and basically go through and tell me why you like this. And the answers to that are very insightful. You get people, some of the best answers are things of just everyday products that people say, I really like this because, and when they start articulating, you've got someone who thinks about product and end users when they can begin to articulate those sorts of things. And that makes a really good engineer, in my opinion. I think there's been too many substandard engineers out there who weren't really good engineers, who didn't really have a passion for making things. A good engineer wants to make stuff. And I think so that's really cool and really important bit of all of this stuff. And I think increasingly now, I have a grad that's working with me, and he was saying something last week. He was going through a few things, and I said, hold on a second. did you not pick this up when you're testing? He goes, I'm not really using the product that much. I said, you got to be using the product because you're going to pick this up. You can't be doing your job now in the way that we can move so fast without being full stack. And that involves really using the product, really getting your head into where the customers are with this so that you can see, oh, I really want to be able to do this at this point in time in this process, whatever it might be, or this feature. And I want to be able to do that. So let me just build that quickly. I don't want to have to talk to anyone about it. I'm just going to go and do it. And that's why there's a freedom to this. I don't need to talk to anyone else. I can just make stuff happen without having to go through hoops and tick boxes and ask permissions for stuff and just make it myself. And I want to empower all the engineering teams we have now to do that sort of thing. Get the features, understand where we're at. And ultimately, we need to produce a product that people want to buy and et cetera. It needs to be good and float and all these different things in it in terms of feature blow. But let's iterate, let's test things, and let's build stuff quickly and see if that lands. Because, you know, as we all know, it's very hard to predict what's going to really land out there or not. And I think we're going to have a lot of products out there, and there's going to be a lot of dross. There's going to be a lot of dross out there, and that's fine. We already have that. There's millions of apps in the App Store, most of which are pretty useless, basically. But through that, you're going to get hits, right? If you think about Hosier as an artist, he was in his bedroom, recruited Take Me to the Church, I think, in his bedroom, and his parents' house still, and that all of a sudden became a ridiculously huge hit. And the possibility that we have now, there's a lot of people trying that and don't have any talent, and therefore those people won't generally get discovered. And there's still people with talent that won't get discovered as well. But there will be people that produce stuff without many resources that makes us very egalitarian, and anyone can begin to do this with a good idea, with a good product instinct, a good feel for the market, a good feel for the problems they want to solve. They will be able to create a product that all of a sudden will fly, even though it looks ugly. And that's one of my definitions of product market fit. When you can tell me 10 things you hate about your product because they're embarrassingly bad, but there's still people buying your product, then that is when you've found product market fit. That's nearly the definition of it for me. It's not when we've got everything in there that we plan to do and blah, blah, blah. That's never going to be the case in any good product. When a product's bad and people still want it, then you've realized you've built something that solves a problem. That's the definition of it.
But Glenn, honestly, now there's no excuse to build something that looks bad now. Vibe coding sorts that out for you. To be honest, if you are lazy enough to leave something looking bad right now, then you know it's not something.
Using the word.
Okay, you're not talking about visual.
Okay,
yeah.
My product is visually brilliant, but they don't necessarily do a good job, right? So I'm at the other end of that scale. Everything I do looks great, but it doesn't necessarily fulfill the purpose in the past of having product market fit within that, right? But so I think the back end guys, I think it becomes pretty easy to build the back end code pretty robustly as well. Now, Matt, you might disagree with this completely, but there's definitely things that I've seen the back end code do that are definitely very good out of the shelf. I've personally seen a lot of front end stuff that's not up to my standards, and I spend a lot of my time actually iterating on the front. It's not just the design of what it looks like, it's the micro interactions with features that I think is where the UX-y bit of it comes in, not the UI bit, but the UX bit of it. And you need to try to get those things right.
I think you're right, because I think it's now about user and product and less about everything else. So I think that's the part that is exciting, actually. And maybe I was wrong by comparing it to YouTube, because one of the things that I remember when listening about how the Beatles, became famous and that kind of thing. That they did so much grind in front of pubs, in front of people, and got immediate feedback, and that's what refined them. And actually, it's a bit different, because that's what product is like. Getting product out there, watching the analytics. It is like seeing users on it, how you do, and those people who are best at doing that, I think, have got a real chance of. Forget how it's built. Are the users interacting well with it? How are they interacting? How can you optimize that? You nail that, and you've got a chance of getting anywhere.
I guess it's just down to growth principles, right? Growth levers. It's quite a big unlock there. But how do people who know how to code vibe code, or do they?
I don't like the term, because I don't like thinking that it might be really high quality code as well. But see, the way I do it, and I know how to code, the way I do it feels like I can have Netflix on one side, to be honest. You're waiting for it to go. You get on the AI prompts group at that point, don't you? Because you've done your prompt and you're waiting for it to code. You can see what it's doing. It's about right. You just do a couple of cursory checks. Make sure you do a git pull just in case it screws. A git check, a git commit just in case it screws something up. and you can see what's changed. It's nice. It's really pleasant. You don't have to worry about that semicolon that would have kept you up all night. You don't have to worry about that anymore. It's so much better for anyone, I think. It's like fantastic.
Yeah, it definitely needs a little bit of concentration, I think. I've seen when I've been distracted trying to do 2 or 3 things at once, then bad things can happen. What just happened there? I missed a couple of commits, and I'm all of a sudden it's gone a bit off the reservation. So it can do that now.
I was thinking about the other day, the commit button in Cursor. They should call that bank, shouldn't they? Because that's what it feels like. It's bank it. And then it's spin that button on the bottom right where you're trying to make it do stuff. Because sometimes it does run away and you wonder how the hell it got back and what checkpoint do I have to get back to now to correct where it's got to. But yeah, there's certain rules to live by, I think.
Tell me about it. I didn't even know what GitHub was in the beginning, so I would just go straight into Cursor and be like, let's go, let's see if I can build Pokemon, blah blah blah, and it would be like almost there, and then it would be like, okay, now I'm a granny with dementia and I've completely forgotten half your app and I'm going to delete half of it. And I had so many moments where I was like, no, what are you doing? Why have you done this? And there was no rollback. Restore didn't exist back then. But yeah, that was certainly a very hard lesson for me to learn. Was like, you have to commit.
Lizzie, you're a good person to ask because you've started from that stage and you are where you are now. I wanted to ask, do you still feel that people come into it and say, I have no idea of coding, but the way that you're talking now, a hell of a lot of stuff. So how much do you think it's coached you in order to get from where you were to where you are now? And where do you feel you are on the level now?
I feel like it was probably the best tutor I could ever have. Before Cursor came out, it came out quite at an opportune moment. I downloaded loads of courses in how to code just because I was interested in exploring that avenue. And I'm not a very academic person. I'm definitely a very hands-on person. So for me, like trial and error, like bashing your head against the wall, why is this not working? And then getting the AI to explain, oh, I've been doing this. I've made 19 million WebSockets. And it's surely that's not right. Google it. Why is it doing that? Like, how many WebSockets are a normal amount of WebSockets? How many source files should I have? How many client files should I have? Like, and now I know things, but maybe it's not because I've been classically trained, but I can tell when it's starting to go off the rails. And when it's not applying things correctly, I'm like, okay, yeah, it's made another file randomly. Okay, let's try and find where that file is and see if I can update it. It's made 7 CSS files for the same page. Why is it doing that? Okay, let's bring it back in line. But it's been my best learning experience for me. I wouldn't, if you loaded up VS Code and asked me to code an app, I wouldn't know how. But I can more or less detect where it's going on and off the road.
This is interesting. I mean, the thing that made Cursor exciting was the agentic mode and then YOLO, etc. It does feel like it needs more agents. I know somebody said earlier, we are the other agent, might have been you, Peter, but it needs other agents. There was somebody on Twitter today launched their SaaS app built in Cursor, and without noticing that it was exposing the API keys they were using to access LLMs and had full right to the database backend, etc. And they got thoroughly exploited. These feel like things that other agents could be doing, looking the code from a specifically security-minded point of view, saying at the end of a run of the agent, yep, that's great, seems to work, but it's introduced something horrible. And maybe this is just too difficult for Cursor to do at the moment because of the context limitations and cost limitations and the work they're doing to minimize the context that's sent, etc. But it feels like that kind of functionality has to be there ultimately if you're really going to realize.
I think this might be the moment that you had just before the iPhone came out, because it feels like I remember I had a Sony at that time and we could do everything on my Sony, but there was no one that pulled it together all properly. And it feels like we're at that stage now where something's going to pull it all together, and you're going to have the design, you're going to have the technical architecture, you're going to have the security checking at the end, something's to your pull requests and feedback to itself. And I think there's a great opportunity there for something that just does it all, isn't there?
Yeah, I think that conversation we had a little bit this morning, Peter, on the AI prompts chat was actually quite insightful. It was one of those things that a few things crystallized in our concepts around this stuff. I think Matthew's correct in that Cursor's trying an optimization to keep your bill under $20 a month, basically, so that it's not using up too much code. And I think it does a really good job of that. I think Cursor is an amazing tool within that price limit. So in that way, if that's the degree of success that they wanted to achieve, they're really doing a good job of achieving that. The question, though, I think that they've missed, and I don't think anyone within Cursor is asking correctly, is this a good thing? And are we missing a trick here? If we just took off some of these guardrails and did things in a different way and allowed ourselves to use up more resource, would someone be paying us $100 a month for this? And I went like, absolutely. Like, I'm hiring engineers at the moment. If Cursor could do this better, so like, of course we'll pay more than $20. For me, it's a ridiculous price point. It's the wrong price point. So we see Devin trying to do that at $500 a month, and there's definitely big companies taking that on. And we talk, and OpenAI have mentioned they got a $20,000 a month a package that's coming up. I think only some very high flyers are going to take that one up. But in reality, they're adding a lot more value and could do it a lot better. So I'd like to see Cursor apply themselves to go, what is the $200 a month account that we can do, and how could we make that account great? Because I think those guys have a lot of knowledge about how to do that. But I think more than one agents doing specific jobs, better knowledge of the architecture of the app and how that's stored and consumed. I think that needs to happen better than it does at the moment. I think it's not bad at the moment. It happened a couple of times today even, where maybe it's got to do with the fact that I looked at one piece of code, then I moved to another piece of code, put my cursor at a certain point, but then it just completely completed everything, the thing I actually wanted to do without me saying a word, where you're not even telling it any instructions. You've just looked at a couple of points and put your cursor at a point, and it's just delivered the result without you needing to type anything. And that's not an agentic mode. That's actually just the autocomplete in the main window. And it does that occasionally, which never ceases to amaze me when it does that.
I tell you what, I've been so impressed recently, and it's been okay, I've had a few criticisms of Claude 3.7 for sure. I've written them a couple of times. But I've been so impressed, the bells and whistles it adds on and the improvements it makes that you didn't ask for, actually. So I know it does go off and do a few things itself that it shouldn't do, but on balance, it does so well in actually putting things in the right way before. I've just typed, and things that you never asked it to do. I think you can already see it. You can already see where this thing is going, basically.
I had one of those things yesterday. I was doing dashboards, and I wanted some number output from the dashboards and the legend. I said, we see those numbers on that legend. Can you add those numbers to that legend? And it goes, yeah, that's cool. I've added to that chart. You've got another couple of charts in there as well. They could probably do with those numbers as well. Let me just add those. Boom. I was just like, didn't ask it for that, but it's right. It was good logic, and it was a good inference, and it just did the right thing. And I was like, happy and impressed with that. Occasionally it gets those things wrong. That's okay. You have to allow it to make the odd mistake in terms of it's going to get most of the things right, or it's trying to do things that are enhancing your value a lot. So that's okay. But you can't hate it because when it gets something wrong and does something you haven't asked it to do, that's okay. You can always roll it back again. Stop there, intervene. Sometimes you see it doing something destructive in the middle of that. Very rarely, I gotta say, in this particular case, very rarely do you see a destructive thing happen. But occasionally it does, and you go, "Stop! Don't do that. I don't want you to be doing that." But that doesn't happen that often for me. And most of the time, it's that very positive experience if it's proactively doing the right thing. And I think that's amazing and semi-magical, to be honest with you.
Is there any closing thoughts about vibe coding that anyone wants to share?
Just in the middle of that thinking, I was coming out in terms of being able to speak to it, being able to type things and things appear. Joshua, one of our friends, is a very big advocate of speaking and doing that. I think I like typing more so than speaking. But the bigger mechanic will be when we get a brain-computer interface, and all of a sudden I'm just thinking these things into existence, and that's the ultimate expression of the vibe code thing happening.
All of us are going to have lost our jobs way before then, so don't worry about that, Glenn.
But we do think it's a very interesting thing that's developed over the last month and a bit in terms of this term. It does mean something that is meaningful. It is here to stay. We're at the start of the journey on it, and the destination of that journey is going to be a very interesting place. It's going to have a lot of ramifications for the software industry and the audience of the software industry, I think, as well, and what's going to be.
People outside the industry should be watching what's happening in the world of software development, because this is the first industry to be fully disrupted. One of the things that's really interesting about it is how much the people doing it are enjoying, for the most part, being disrupted. Now, maybe that won't be the same in other industries, maybe it will, but people should be watching and seeing what's happening in software engineering, because it's an important first indicator of what's coming for everything else.
No, we are seeing that already in other industries as well, Matthew. So one of the best legal AI out there is a thing called Harvey, and the lawyers that talk about that are agreeing that it's beginning to take away some of the basic legal work and the grunt type legal work, but that's freeing up people to think about their clients' problems with greater depth and be more creative about these problems. And I think that's the
individuals
thing
can do it too. I was talking to a friend the other day, needed an important letter written, got a draft from a lawyer, and he could see he wasn't entirely happy with it, got AI to read through it and got very good advice and passed that, the letter and the advice, back to another lawyer who said, yeah, that's awesome. Let's just fix it up. Done.
I think actually where it leaves things is quite interesting, because it gets, where we're seeing in the software industry is where I think the style of roles it leaves is really interesting. Like, it leaves very user-centered people at the moment, and then people who know technical architecture on the other end. The middle kind of disappears, and I see that almost as being exactly every industry replicated across every industry at the moment. Like, that's the first stage, where the people that are speaking to the customers, they're not going to get disrupted in the first stage at all, and doing that side. The people who know the most and are the smartest in that industry, they are not going to get disrupted, because they still are going to be needed to understand all of those high-level technicals. In your example, the law firm, the top lawyer there that has seen it all before and understands everything, they're safe. It's just what happens in the middle. How do you then get from the bottom to the top of an industry? I think those are all the things that we're going to see playing out. And it might be that it helps speed up that progression from vibe coding, and then suddenly, Lizzie, in 6 months' time, you are the technical architect because you've been using the tool so well, and there's no middle bit anymore. Yeah,
I think the technical architecture begins to become known and go like, this is the best technical architecture for this group of problems, and then let's just use that. We don't need to reinvent it every time. No. It's just like people are using best practice and applying it. AI can do that really well. So I think some of these big architectural issues, everyone was reinventing the wheel. People going, okay, I'm going to design a new checkout experience. It's going to be even better. And you go, what's your chances of really creating something that's novel and new when so many people are trying to do exactly this job? And I think there's a lot of replication that was going on. And I think that replication is now being distilled down into learnings. This is now really best practice, and the AI can do that best practice. So therefore, that intelligence begins to become much more of a commodity. What doesn't become a commodity in this future that you talk about there, it's the people with agency. It's how people take advantage of these tools and capabilities with creativity, with energy to solve problems and deliver the things to the world that add value. That has been always the case, and it will continue to be the case. I think those people will continue to do well with a bigger tool set of how to deliver that way.
So. I really want to know what Peter thinks, because he's been suspiciously quiet, and I'm just waiting for him to just drop a mind-blowing bomb before we wrap up. So have you got any last thoughts, Peter?
I think vibe coding's been used synonymously with, or implicitly with, low quality coding, and I don't think that's accurate or representative. I think the way that Andre put this label on something that people were doing and nobody put a label on it before. It's like when Paul Graham did his founder mode essay, people were suddenly like, oh yeah, that's a thing. Thank you for naming it. But I think the reality is, like, it's just this massive accelerant. And I've been writing like some of the best code of my life at a rate of 2 days last week, 1,800 lines of code a day, like unbelievable, and like such high quality code. So that's one observation. I think it's like, it's a full spectrum, but I think obviously, like, unsurprisingly, the volume of voices, both in terms of number and in terms of amplitude, are from those who've gone from not being able to do stuff to doing stuff, because it's so exciting to be in that position, and all of a sudden you can do all of these things. Yeah, the thing I was wondering about, the thing I was thinking on is, what happens with this accelerant, like this accelerant of capabilities? And I was thinking about the suite of skills that we now just take it for granted that somebody would have. I like look at the suite of skills that you've got, Lizzie, and I think like you can produce video, you're going to be able to edit it, distribute it. You can now write code, you can design, you can publish stuff. Like these are a suite of skills that like we didn't. You've got an easel behind you, so I assume that you can also paint on top of that, and you can make people, which is a pretty badass skill. But these are a suite of skills for somebody in the 80s to be able to do all of that, like much less any single one of them at a level that anyone can hear can do one of them. Like nobody in the 80s would be able to make video or distribute it or write code in the way that any of us can. And so I've just been thinking over as we've been talking through it. I've been thinking, in fact, I was listening to Ron Conway talking with Jessica Livingston about how before Google and the like started popularizing open source software, you used to have to spend $150,000 on software licenses before you could write a line of code, like to get your SQL Server or your Oracle database and to get your Windows license and to get like a £70,000 silicon graphics machine. And when you drop the price of that right down, then you get an explosion in the number of people doing stuff. And when you drop the costs, then you get an explosion in the number of different businesses and the nuances of the different things that people can serve. So I know that like the standard job we all go to is nobody could imagine a social media influencer or like the meta level of that, like a social media influencer manager, like 20 years ago. That wasn't a thing, and it is a thing now. And I just wonder, as we get these super strengths across so many different disciplines, as so many people now have, just what's it look like? What other stuff gets produced? It's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, that's a possibility I see as well. I agree with that. I think it's really exciting that everyone's got these skills all together. People can do stuff now, and that they just would have not been able to do before due to cost restrictions in general and skill restrictions. And now everyone's having the access to have those skills. Now everyone can be the director of the movie, right? You know, you can produce it, direct it, and produce it, and do all these different things, and that's massively empowering.
I feel like it democratizes a lot of things. So people who wouldn't have the opportunity to go to university and learn all this sort of stuff, as long as they have a crap computer and patience, they'd be able to build something beyond their wildest dreams that they wouldn't be able to do 6 months ago, a year ago.
You're right. It can show a lot more of your personality and character as well.
I also, I don't, oh, sorry, go ahead, David. I didn't realize you were still.
No, I just, I was like, we were doing our website in our office the other day, and the guy that was doing it right at the end, we just said, oh, you know what? Let's just make a really fun meet the team page and see what it does. We haven't put it live, but within a few seconds came out with an amazing, didn't know anyone's images or anything like that, but it came out with a really good, cool layout, the kind of way that like summed us up as a business straight away. And I think that's quite fun. There was, we said, create it in a quite fun way. I think you can start to see a lot of those things so I think you're going to see a lot more character as well in that way too.
Awesome. Any last minute thoughts before we wrap? Speak now or forever hold your tongue. Looking at you, Glenn. All right, awesome, cool. Thank you very much to my wonderful guests, as always. And anybody sitting at home wondering what vibe coding is, I hope that this cleared things up, or maybe it made things more confusing, who knows. But yeah, thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to shut the recording down.